Hey there and welcome back to MurderTube. Today we're going to go over a case in New York where a young lady was savagely attacked and also let down by her neighbors and the police. This is the case of Kitty Genovese. Kitty was born on the 7th of July 1935 in New York as Catherine Susan Genovese. Kitty was the oldest of 5 siblings belonging to an Italian-American family. She would be described as a bright young girl who was self-assured beyond her years and that she had a sunny disposition. She dreamed of opening her own Italian-styled restaurant. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Kitty worked jobs as a bartender. While working as a bartender, Kitty and her friend would act as bookies, taking bets from bar patrons on horse races. This would unfortunately lead Kitty to being arrested in August of 1961 for bookmaking, where Kitty and her friend would be fined $50 each and would lose their jobs. However, Kitty would then get another bartending job at Eve's 11th Hour Bar, where she would soon make her way up to managing the bar. Working towards her dream of owning an Italian restaurant, Kitty worked double shifts to save money, which leads us to the fateful morning of the 13th of March 1964. At the age of 28, Kitty finished working her shift at around 2:30 a.m. She would get into her car and begin driving home to the apartment that she shared with her girlfriend at 8270 Austin Street. While stopped at a traffic light on Hoover Avenue, she was spotted by a predator waiting in a parked vehicle. This person would follow Kitty as she drove home. It was around 3:15 a.m. when Kitty parked in the parking lot about 30 meters away from her apartment. While she walked towards her apartment, the predator began to approach her with a knife in his hand. Kitty ran towards the front of the apartments. The predator ran faster. He stabbed Kitty in the back 2 times. Kitty would scream out, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Help me." It is believed that several neighbors heard this noise, however only a couple of them recognized it as a cry for help. One neighbor shouted, "Let that girl alone." Hearing this, the predator became spooked and ran back to his vehicle and drove away. Kitty was left badly wounded and staggering towards the back of the apartment building. None of her neighbors came outside to check on her. Ten minutes later, the predator returned. He would find Kitty in a hallway of the apartment building where a locked door had prevented her from getting inside. Alone, severely wounded, and barely conscious, Kitty was an easy target for the predator. She would be stabbed several more times and sexually assaulted before the predator would steal the $49 that she was carrying and flee the crime scene. This attack on Kitty is believed to have lasted half an hour. She had defensive wounds on her hands, showing that she had tried to defend herself. Kitty was found shortly after the second attack by her close friend and neighbor, Sophia Ferrara. Kitty was still alive at this time, and Sophia held Kitty in her arms until the ambulance arrived. It was around 4:15 a.m. that the ambulance would arrive and transport Kitty to the hospital. She would die before she reached the hospital. The police investigation would begin, and detectives would question multiple neighbors, as well as Kitty's girlfriend, Mary Zelenko, for several hours. Mary was at first considered a suspect in the murder. That is, until 6 days later. On March 19, 1964, police received a call reporting that a neighbor's house was being burglarized in the Ozone Park area. When officers arrived, they found the suspect outside with a stolen television in the trunk of his car. 29-year-old Winston Moseley would be arrested. Winston Moseley grew up in New York. His parents were often separated, and he was described as an intelligent but troubled child. Winston would be married and divorced once, and then later remarry. He worked as a machine operator and he had 3 children. Until the time of his arrest for burglary, he had no criminal record. One of the police officers noticed that the vehicle Winston was driving was similar to a vehicle that witnesses had reported during the murder of Kitty Genovese. Winston also had scabs on his hands. So during questioning, Winston confessed to the murder of Kitty. He would also confess to between 30 and 40 burglaries, numerous sexual assaults, and 2 additional murders. These murders would be of 24-year-old Annie Mae Johnson and 15-year-old Barbara Kralik. Annie Mae Johnson was shot 6 times in her Ozone Park apartment. The murderer then had sexual relations with her dead body. Her death was first listed as a stabbing, however, after Winston insisted that he used a gun, upon re-examination, it was determined that a gun was the cause of death. 15-year-old Barbara Kralik died in hospital after being stabbed 16 times on the 2nd floor of her home. Winston's wife worked as a nurse, and she was working a night shift on the night of Kitty's murder. Winston used this to his advantage, and he went out that night with the intentions of finding a victim. He would be charged with the murder of Kitty, however, he would not be charged with the other 2 murders, even though he confessed to them. This is because the police already had someone in custody that confessed to the murder of Barbara Kralik. This individual would later state that he was beaten and abused by the police into signing the confession. Winston would actually be used as a defense witness in the trial for this murder, where he would give a step-by-step detailed account of Barbara's murder. This would result in the trial being a hung jury, and a second trial would be conducted. During the second trial, Winston would claim that he did not murder Barbara, and this individual was found guilty of Barbara's murder. The trial for the murder of Kitty Genovese would begin on June 8, 1964, and this would last 4 days. Winston originally entered a plea of not guilty, however, his attorney would later change this plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury would deliberate for 7 hours before returning their verdict: guilty. Winston would be sentenced to death. When his sentence was read aloud, the crowd cheered. Winston himself showed no emotion. The judge even stated that he did not believe in capital punishment, but when he sees a monster like this, he wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch himself. But 3 years later, the Court of Appeals found that Winston should have been able to argue that he was medically insane, and due to this, his sentence was reduced to life in prison. Strangely, Winston's sick criminal behavior does not stop there. On March 18, 1968, he was being transported back to prison after having a minor injury treated at a hospital. During transport, Winston attacked the correctional officer, stole his gun, and managed to flee into a nearby vacant house. Winston stayed in this house undetected for 3 days, until the owners came to check on their house. He kept this couple hostage for over an hour. He bound and gagged them, and he sexually assaulted the wife. He would then steal their car and flee to Grand Island, where on March 22nd, he broke into yet another home and held a woman and her daughter hostage. Thankfully, 2 hours later, he released them unharmed, and then he would finally surrender himself to the police. For this, he would be charged with escape and kidnapping, and he would receive 2 additional 15-year sentences. Winston first became eligible for parole in 1984. During his first parole hearing, he tried claiming that the notoriety that he faced makes him a victim. He stated that, For a victim outside, it's a one-time or 1 hour or 1 minute affair. But for the person who's caught, it's forever. Yeah, he's trying to say that someone who commits violent assaults, sexual assaults, murders, is more of a victim than their victim. He also claimed that he never intended to kill Kitty, and that he considered it to be a mugging. His parole would be denied. His parole would actually be denied 18 times in total. In 2016, at the age of 81, Winston died in prison, after serving 52 years. The case of Kitty Genovese received a lot of attention due to a New York Times article that stated 38 witnesses saw and heard the attack, and they all did nothing. This would lead to psychological studies into something called the bystander effect. This is a psychological theory that the more people present, the less likely people are to offer help. If there is only one witness to an incident, they feel much more responsibility to help. If there are lots of people, they are much more likely to not want to get involved and let someone else take the responsibility instead. But in 2016, the New York Times published an article which said that their reporting on Kitty Genovese's murder was flawed and that they had grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses and what they had seen, heard, and perceived. There were some witnesses in Kitty's murder, however, most of them were ear witnesses. They heard a commotion and didn't really realize what exactly was happening. The few that did realize that someone was being attacked didn't realize that Kitty was being stabbed. Most thought that it was like a lover's argument and that Winston was maybe punching Kitty, and that once he ran away, although dazed and a little wounded, Kitty was okay and walking away and that she was safe. Also, due to moving to the back of the building and into a hallway, those witnesses that saw the first attack would not have seen the second attack. One witness did see the savage attack though. Carl Ross lived in the same apartment building, and he was described as a nervous and frightened person. He heard noises outside his apartment door and also what sounded like a woman screaming, but he didn't want to go see what was happening. He didn't want to get involved. After the noises wouldn't stop, he did eventually open his front door a crack and peek outside. He saw his friend Kitty laying on her back, trying to speak, as Winston continuously stabbed her. Carl shut his door. Instead of calling the police, Carl called friends asking for advice. Carl would only call the police when he heard Sophia screaming for help and for someone to call the police. A couple of neighbors would also later state that they did call the police earlier, however, it is unsure whether that is true, as there's no log for these calls. If those calls were received from original witnesses of the first attack, it is possible that it was not treated as a priority call due to witnesses believing it was a regular assault and that the suspect had fled and the victim was walking away. So between misinterpretation, some neighbors slow to act or to even help at all, and possibly to the police being slow to respond or not treating it seriously, Kitty was left alone to suffer a brutal attack. An attack that she would agonizingly be alive for throughout the entire attack and sexual assault. This was a senseless, brutal attack from a sick and twisted individual. And the saddest part of all is that Kitty may have lived if help arrived sooner. A small comfort may be that her killer was never released, and that if Winston did kill one or both of Barbara and Annie, that he would spend the rest of his life in prison anyway. So do you think Winston planned to kill someone that night? Or do you think that his original intention was just to commit a mugging? Like this video if you liked it, leave feedback if you didn't, and be sure to subscribe as we'll have 2 new videos every week. It's a crazy world out there, so stay safe.